Let the silence speak first. That's something I learned after 38 years of being a structural engineer. When a building wants to tell you something's wrong, it doesn't send an email. It gets quiet in a particular way. A creak in the wrong place. A gap that wasn't there last Tuesday. You learn to sit with that silence and let it finish its sentence before you react. I wish I'd applied the same patience to my personal life about 10 years sooner. My name isn't important. What matters is this. I'm 51 years old. I spent 22 years with a woman I would have called my best friend. And I once stood in the middle of my brother's wedding reception and did something that made 63 people go completely silent all at once. I'll get to that. But first, you need to understand who I was before any of this happened. Because the man I became on that Saturday evening in September didn't arrive out of nowhere. He was built slowly, the way pressure builds inside a structure nobody's bothering to inspect. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, second of 3 boys. Father was a contractor. Mother taught 3rd grade for 30 years. Practical people. Not cold, just practical. In our house, you didn't talk about feelings the way people talk about feelings the way people talk about feelings now. You showed up. You fixed things. You kept your word. That was the whole moral code, and I absorbed it completely. I was good at engineering because I was patient. I could stare at a problem longer than most people were willing to. My college roommate used to joke that I could watch paint dry and find it interesting. He wasn't wrong. I liked the part of the job where you had to stay still and just observe before you touched anything. Intervention changes a system. Observation tells you the truth of what you're actually dealing with. I met my wife. I'll call her my wife because that's who she was for 18 years, legally and otherwise, at a birthday party for a mutual friend in 2001. She was laughing at something when I walked in, and the laugh was the first thing I noticed. Not her appearance, though she was striking. The laugh. It was the kind that came from her whole body, unself-conscious, like she'd forgotten other people were watching. I spent the rest of that party trying to make her do it again. We dated for 4 years. I was deliberate about that, too deliberate, she used to say. She wanted to get engaged after year 2. I said I needed more time. Not because I doubted her, because I knew what I was signing up for, and I wanted to be certain I was ready to honor it completely. When I finally did propose, I meant every syllable of it. We built a good life, not a flashy one. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled occasionally for work, brought home a solid income. I had my firm. We had a house in the suburbs, a dog named after a president. I'll leave which one to your imagination. And we had what I thought was a genuine partnership. Disagreements, yes. Dry spells, yes. But the foundation felt sound. In hindsight, I was inspecting the wrong things. I was so focused on the visible structure, the shared dinners, the vacations, the amicable division of household tasks that I missed what was happening in the load-bearing walls. And by the time the creek became impossible to ignore, a lot had already shifted. It started about 3 years before the wedding. My brother, I'll call him my younger brother, he's 4 years behind me, got engaged to a woman he'd been with for 6 years. Good woman, solid relationship, the kind of couple you look at and feel genuinely happy for. The engagement party was in the spring. My wife and his fiancée became fast friends that night, or seemed to. They started texting, making plans. My wife started mentioning her more and more in conversation. I thought nothing of it. My wife had always been social in a way I wasn't. She needed a wider circle. I respected that. What I didn't notice, because I wasn't looking, was the shift in how she talked about our life when she came back from their girls' dinners. Small things. She'd use words like settled in contexts where she used to use words like stable. She'd mention things her friends were doing, weekends away, spontaneous trips, as observations that lingered a half-second too long to be purely informational. Then came the conference. Her company ran an annual sales conference in different cities. That year it was in Nashville. 4 days, end of July. She'd been before. I'd never thought much about it. She came back from this one quieter. Not sad quiet. Thinking quiet. The kind of quiet I recognized from work when an engineer has run the numbers and doesn't love the answer. I asked if she was all right. She said she was tired. I let it go. I'm 51 years old and I still think about that moment. I let it go. 3 weeks later, she told me she needed to talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the one we'd bought together at an estate sale in 2006. The one with the small water ring on the left side that we always meant to sand out and never did. She folded her hands on that table and told me she thought she had feelings for someone else. Not that something had happened, that she had feelings. I sat with that for a long time. Maybe 90 seconds of silence, which, in a conversation like that, feels like standing in a room that keeps getting smaller. Then I asked, "Someone from the conference?" She said yes. I asked if anything had happened physically. She said no, but her voice moved in a way that answered differently. I didn't push it that night. I said I needed some time to think, and I went and sat in the garage for 2 hours with a beer I didn't really drink. What I was actually doing was running the structural analysis. How compromised is this? Where did the failure originate? What's actually salvageable, and what am I looking at just because I can't accept the alternative? What I landed on after those 2 hours was this, she told me. She could have said nothing. She chose to tell me, which meant either she wanted to end it or she wanted to save it. Both of those were conversations I could have. What I couldn't have was the conversation where I just absorbed this and we never spoke of it again, and I spent the next decade slowly becoming someone who'd stopped trusting the walls he lived inside. We went to couples counseling. 4 months of it. She said the Nashville thing, she called it that, the Nashville thing, like it was a weather event, was a symptom of her feeling unseen, unexciting to herself, like she'd plateaued. I understood the words. I genuinely tried to understand the feeling behind them. What I couldn't reconcile was the specific dishonesty, not just the emotional detour. The way she'd come home from Nashville and said she was tired. The 3 weeks of acting normal while she'd decided how or whether to tell me. The voice movement when I asked if anything physical had happened. I stayed. Because I'd said I would, and because I still believed the foundation was worth saving, and because I am my father's son, and my father's sons do not walk away from things they committed to without exhausting every option. We had a decent year after that. Not a great year. Decent. The counselor was good. We communicated more. She seemed more present. I told myself we were rebuilding. My brother's wedding was scheduled for that September, 14 months after Nashville. We were both in the wedding party. She was a bridesmaid. I was best man. We'd been planning our contributions for the better part of a year. The rehearsal dinner was a Friday. The ceremony Saturday afternoon, reception that evening at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found a text. I wasn't snooping. I want to be precise about that. Her phone was on the counter and a preview notification appeared while I was standing right there. Just a few words visible on the screen, but those few words had a specific geometry to them. The way certain cracks in concrete have a specific geometry that tells you exactly what kind of stress caused them. I didn't pick up the phone. I stood there for a moment and then I went and sat in my car. She came to find me about 20 minutes later. She knocked on the car window. I rolled it down. I looked at her and I didn't say anything and she looked at me, and after a moment she said, "I know." We talked until midnight. She admitted it hadn't stopped. It had been intermittent, she said, with significant gaps, and she believed it was finally over now. But she acknowledged it hadn't ended completely after Nashville the way she'd let me believe. The counseling months had been real, she said. Her effort had been real, but she hadn't been fully honest about the timeline. She said she was sorry. She said she loved me. She said she didn't want to lose what we built. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I need you to give me the next 2 weeks. Just let me get through my brother's wedding. Don't ask me what I'm thinking. Don't push for resolution. Just give me 2 weeks and let me be his best man without this sitting on top of everything." She agreed. She was visibly relieved, I think, because she interpreted it as a sign I was staying. I don't entirely blame her for that interpretation. Those 2 weeks were strange. I went through the motions competently. I wrote a best man speech. I attended the final fittings. I picked up the cake topper when the bakery called to say it was ready. I was present for everything required of me. On the inside, I was doing a different kind of calculation. The kind where you've already gotten the answer and you're just checking your work. My brother noticed something was off. He pulled me aside the Thursday before the wedding, said I seemed somewhere else. I told him I had a lot on my mind with work and not to worry about it. He let it go, the way people do when they want to believe the reassurance. Saturday came. The ceremony was beautiful, genuinely, objectively beautiful. My brother cried when his bride walked down the aisle. I stood up there next to him and felt an enormous amount of love for him and an enormous amount of grief for myself. Simultaneously, the way large emotions often coexist once you stop trying to keep them in separate rooms. My wife was stunning in her bridesmaid dress. She looked at me during the ceremony with an expression I recognized as hope. I didn't look away. I held her gaze for a moment, and then I looked back at my brother. The reception started at 6. Vineyard, outdoor space, string lights, the whole beautiful production. About 60 guests. My brother's in-laws had money and they'd used it generously. Open bar, a band that actually knew how to read a room, food that people were complimenting all night. I gave my best man speech at 7:30. I'd spent a week on it. It was honest and funny and specific to my brother in ways that made him laugh and made their mother cry, which is the precise target demographic for a best man speech. I got a standing ovation from half the room. My wife was in the front row and she was beaming, and I thought, she thinks this is turning a corner. She thinks tonight is going to be the night I signal that we're okay. I sat back down. The band started playing again. People drifted to the dance floor. Around 9 o'clock, my wife came and found me at the bar. She leaned close and said, "You were incredible up there." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Can we dance?" We walked to the edge of the dance floor. The song was something slow, the kind of song designed to make people lean into each other and not think too hard. She put her hand on my shoulder. I put my hand on her back. We moved for about 30 seconds. Then I stepped back. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way you'd step back from a structure you've just confirmed is not safe to enter. She looked at me. I looked at her. I reached into my jacket pocket. I'd put it there that morning, deliberately, because I knew this was when it would happen. And I took out my wedding ring. I'd taken it off that morning, put it in my pocket, worn a small bandage on my ring finger that nobody had noticed or mentioned. I held the ring in my palm and I looked at her for a moment. Then I set it down on the small cocktail table next to us. I didn't throw it. I didn't make a speech. I just set it down the way you'd set down a glass when you finished the drink. She said, "What are you doing?" I said. What I should have done 2 weeks ago. The table was close enough to the dance floor that 2 couples near us had already stopped moving. Not because of a scene. There wasn't one, yet. But because the quiet between us had a specific density that humans are instinctively alert to. She said, "Not here. Please, not here." I said, "I'm not doing anything here. I'm not going to make a scene at my brother's wedding, but I'm also not putting that ring back on tonight." She picked up the ring. She held it out to me. Her hand was shaking, and her eyes were filling, and I felt the full weight of 22 years standing right there in that hand, and I understood what it cost her to hold it out. I said, "Keep it until I ask for it back. I don't know how long that'll be." Her voice broke a little. She said, "You're done." I said, "I've been done. I just needed to finish this evening for him first." One of the couples near us quietly moved away. I later learned that my brother's college friend, a very decent guy named, I'll say August because I'll give him a name that fits him, actually physically stepped between us and the rest of the dance floor and just stood there casually, drink in hand, giving us a wall of privacy while the moment resolved. I didn't know he did that until my brother told me 3 weeks later. I've never forgotten it. My wife left the dance floor. I stood there for a moment. Then I went to the bar and got a glass of water, and I stood near the back of the reception for the next 45 minutes, and I watched my brother dance with his wife, and I let myself feel all of it. The grief, the relief, the loneliness of having made the right call, without trying to manage any of it. My brother found me before the night was over. He pulled me into a side hallway, said he'd heard something had happened, and asked if I was all right. I told him yes, that I was sorry if it put a shadow on his night, that he should go back to his wife. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "I always thought you were the one carrying everything." Then he hugged me and went back to his reception, and I stood in that hallway for about 3 minutes and did something I hadn't done in probably 15 years. I won't tell you what, but the hallway was empty, and nobody saw it, and I needed it. The months that followed were not cinematic. Divorce at 50 is not a montage. It's paperwork and logistics and the particular exhaustion of dismantling a shared life that has accumulated 22 years of furniture and habits, and the small architecture of two people who knew each other's routines completely. The dog stayed with me, which was the court decision I cared most about. She tried, twice, to reopen the conversation. The first time was a letter, handwritten, 6 pages, which I read completely and responded to with 2 sentences. I received your letter. I don't think more conversation is going to change what I know. The second time was a phone call, 4 months after I'd filed, in which she said she'd finally ended everything and wanted to know if there was any world in which I'd reconsider. I thought about it genuinely. I sat with the question the way I'd been trained to sit with problems. Still, patient, willing to wait for the honest answer. The honest answer was no. Not because I'd stopped caring about her. I hadn't, not entirely. And I'm not sure I ever will in the residual way that long relationships leave their fingerprints on you. But because I knew, with the same certainty I felt standing on that dance floor, that I would spend the rest of my life inspecting the walls, listening for the creak that meant something was shifting again. That's not a life. That's a long inspection job. She has, as far as I know, moved somewhere on the East Coast. I heard through my brother's wife that she's in another relationship. I don't know if it's the same person. I don't need to know. What I know is this. I turned 51 in March of this year. I had dinner with my brother and his wife and their 8-month-old, who has my brother's exact eyebrows and his wife's ability to make a room feel warmer just by existing in it. After dinner, we sat on their back porch, and my brother said, "You seem like yourself again." I thought about that on the drive home. I don't think I'm the same self I was before any of this. I don't think that's possible, and I'm not sure it would be desirable if it were. The man I was before was patient in the way that can become passivity. He observed without intervening for too long. He let the building tell him there was a problem instead of walking the structure regularly and asking harder questions. The man I am now still likes the quiet, still watches the paint dry when necessary. But he's learned the difference between patience and avoidance, and he doesn't confuse stillness with safety anymore. August, by the way, my brother's college friend, I've had dinner with him twice since the divorce. Good man. He never brought up what he saw on the dance floor, never made it a thing. The second time we had dinner, he mentioned offhandedly that his ex-wife had done something similar years ago, and he'd waited too long to act on what he already knew. We didn't dwell on it. We ordered another round and talked about football, and he told a story about a camping trip that went wrong in 7 different ways, and I laughed until my eyes watered. That laugh, I thought. The whole body kind. I'd forgotten what that felt like from the inside. I'm working on remembering. I've thought a lot about why I waited as long as I did, not the 2 weeks before the wedding. I understand that choice clearly. I needed to give my brother the best man he deserved, without dragging my own wreckage onto his dance floor. That wait had a purpose I can name and stand behind. What I've had to sit with longer, more honestly, is the 14 months before that. The counseling, the careful conversations, the deliberate choice to believe that what she was telling me was the complete truth. I don't regret trying. I want to be clear about that. The trying wasn't weakness. Staying wasn't stupidity. When you've built something real with another person over 2 decades, walking away from it without exhausting every option is its own kind of failure. A failure of seriousness, of follow-through. I'm not built that way, and I don't want to be. But there's a version of patience that stops being a virtue and becomes something else. Something closer to avoidance wearing patience's clothes. And I stayed in that version for longer than I should have because I was better at reading structural problems in concrete and steel than I was at reading them in myself. What I've come to understand is that honesty and courage are not the same thing, and you need both. My wife was honest with me. Eventually, partially, in the way people are honest when the alternative becomes more uncomfortable than the truth. That's not the same as the courage to be honest when it costs you something, when the other person might not stay, when the confession doesn't come with any guarantee of forgiveness. What she practiced was managed disclosure. What I needed from her was actual courage. The same goes for me. I was patient. I was methodical. I gave the situation every reasonable chance. But for a long stretch, I confused thoroughness with bravery, and they're not the same thing either. Being thorough means running every test before you render a verdict. Being brave means being willing to accept the verdict once the tests are done. I ran the tests. The accepting took me longer than it should have. August never made a speech about any of this. He just stood on that dance floor and created a few feet of privacy for two people in a hard moment, and then later he sat across a dinner table from me and told his own version of a similar story without making it a lesson. That's a particular kind of intelligence. The kind that understands people learn better from being seen than from being lectured. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 40. The choices you make under pressure reveal what you actually value, not what you think you value. I thought I valued commitment above almost everything. Turns out I value integrity more. Not perfectly, not without cost, but more. When those two things came into conflict on a vineyard dance floor on a Saturday night in September, the answer was already there. I'd just been postponing it. The ring is in a drawer somewhere. I haven't decided what to do with it. Some days I think I'll have it melted down into something else entirely. A different shape, a different purpose, the same metal. That feels right for reasons I couldn't fully explain, but don't feel the need to.